All right, everyone. Welcome to our dialogue on collaboration, collaborating on air quality from pollution to solution. I'm Danya Rumore, the director of the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program here in the law school, and also faculty here in the law school and in planning at the U. And it really is a pleasure to welcome you to what is now our 6th dialogue on collaboration. I hope some of you have participated in our prior dialogues. This is expected to be our largest. We had 98 people officially registered, so we're expecting a full house, and we're filling up pretty quickly here. Our past dialogues have addressed issues including working with tribes, working with elected officials on water issues, fostering dialogue in divided times, funding for collaboration, and then most recently in this last June, collaborating around the Great Salt Lake. The information from today's dialogue, including a video of the panel speakers' presentations, will be on our Environmental Dispute Resolution Program website, and the information from those previous dialogues are there. So if any of those topics are of interest to you, you can find prior panel presentations and other information on our website. We always welcome input for future dialogue topics, so at the end of the day, you'll have an evaluation form, just a brief one, and we encourage you to submit topic ideas via that evaluation form. And our next dialogue will be this coming June. We usually do June and then December, and it will focus on probably the topic of wildfire or the agricultural-urban interface, but we are again open to other topics, and we have lots of dialogues in the future. For reasons you can probably imagine, we thought it would be a very appropriate time to focus on air quality. I suspect it's on a lot of our minds right now, and we only need to look out the window to know why. We also thought it would be a very appropriate follow-up topic for our conversation about the Great Salt Lake back in June, because as those of you who were there know, one of the things we talked about was the risk to our air quality that a drying lake presents, particularly in the form of potentially having toxic dust in the air. I think that just speaks to the complexity of air quality and how many things come together, so that's something we'll be talking about throughout the rest of the day. We heard from a lot of folks who participated in that June dialogue on the Great Salt Lake that they left feeling very energized and that they actually took action to do things after the dialogue. And we really hope that today's conversation similarly energizes all of you and leaves you with some ideas about things you can do to move the needle and push forward progress on air quality. As with all of our dialogues, the conversation today will really focus on giving you all what we might call the lay of the air in terms of air quality. So we're asking our presenters to really present some information that helps us all have a pretty consummate understanding of what's going on. We also want to introduce some key concepts, particularly concepts related to collaboration, to make sure we're all operating with a shared knowledge and understanding for the rest of the conversation. And we really want to spend a lot of the day engaging you all and talking with each other and learning from each other about how we can work together to make progress on air quality and build on the progress that's already been made. Our twice-a-year dialogues on collaboration, as many of you may know, they are part of our program on collaboration. It is a multi-pronged effort that really seeks to enhance a culture of collaboration around environmental and natural resource issues throughout Utah. The program on collaboration also includes forums on collaboration that are held every other year. Those really seek to engage high-level state and federal agency personnel who are working on environmental and natural resource issues in Utah and learning from each other and learning how we can better collaborate together. We also host an annual short course on effective natural resources collaboration, which is a professional training program that teaches the art and science of environmental and natural resource collaboration. We have a bunch of handouts about that on the table over there. So if you might be interested in that training or know others who might be, our application is now open. We will be taking applications through March. And we usually select about 24 participants representing a very diverse group of stakeholders to come together, again, to learn the art and science of collaboration. This dialogue and the broader Utah program on collaboration would not be possible without a lot of collaboration. And we are deeply thankful to all of our partners, particularly to Dan Adams, who's over that way, Dan, and his whole team from the Langdon Group, who have been really key partners in putting together this dialogue, our prior dialogues, and our forum on collaboration. We've got a lot of Langdon Group folks here in the room. A quick show of hands of folks from the Langdon Group. Thank you all for helping make this possible. And we want to particularly thank Dianne Olson, who's somewhere floating around, and Catherine Daly. Show of hands. I don't know if Dianne in here, yeah. So those two have really made this possible. They're the brains behind this operation. So just a quick round of applause and thanks, please. They put a lot of work into today, so hopefully you all get the benefit of all of this. We also just like to thank our event staff and IT folks who again make this all possible. We have been very fortunate in continuing to expand our list of sponsors for the Utah Program on Collaboration and Related Events. The sponsors for today's event include UCARE, the University of Utah Global Change and Sustainability Center, the Utah Transit Authority, or UTA, Heal Utah, Air and Waste Management Association, Solitude Mountain Resort, Audubon Society, Rocky Mountain Power, the Nature Conservancy. And we also have a variety of sponsors who have sponsored our events over the last many years. And we really appreciate the fact that our sponsor list, again, continues to grow and grow in diversity to really show the diverse range of stakeholders across industry to NGOs to agencies who support collaboration around topics including air quality. We're very thankful to our panelists who will be sharing their wisdom with us today. We very carefully put together today's panel, not to debate the topic, not to share different perspectives per se, but again, to weave together a full story of what's going on so that we can all have a very informed conversation about air quality. We've asked them to share relatively neutral perspectives, again, so you can all form your own perspectives about what needs to be done. But I think they'll also share with you some of their ideas about what they think are the key opportunities and challenges. Our lineup of speakers includes Thom Carter, the Executive Director of UCARE, who will be talking about why we do and why we should care about air quality in the Valley. Then we'll have Kerry Kelly, who's a faculty in civil engineering here at the University of Utah, who will be talking about more of the biophysical and scientific side of air quality. We'll then have Matheson, who's the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality, talking about the regulatory and policy landscape around air quality. And Teri Newell, who's the Deputy Director of the Utah Department of Transportation, talking about planning for future growth along the Wasatch Front, which presents a key challenge for air quality going forward. And Vicki Bennett, the Sustainability Department Director of the Salt Lake City Corporation, talking about case studies of implementation and innovation, some of the innovative things we can do to move forward. And Ashley Miller, who's the Program and Policy Director for Breathe Utah. She's also a graduate of our short course on effective natural resources collaboration, talking about some of the grassroots efforts that have happened and sharing any additional thoughts on air quality. So prior to the event, we also talked to a lot of these speakers and other folks to help us inform this event. And again, we just want to thank those folks who shared their wisdom with us prior to the event, because we really wanted to make sure we were targeting this event to move the needle on air quality as much as possible. A little later, Dianne Olson from the Langdon Group will share some of the key takeaways she took away from those conversations and how that informed this event. So with that all, lots of thank yous. I just want to give you a sense of what to expect from the day. So we're going to start by introducing some key concepts around collaboration, pretty quick, but we just want to make sure you have some key ideas in mind as we move into the rest of the conversation. And then we will have Dianne talking briefly again about some of those key takeaways she took from interviews with a variety of folks prior to this event and what that tells us about air quality. And I think she'll also put that in the context of some of these collaboration concepts. We're then going to pass things over to our panelists who are going to share information with you to give you a sense of the lay of the land in terms of air quality issues in the Salt Lake Valley. And we plan to have plenty of time for panelist dialogue to really dig into these topics a bit more and kind of share their thoughts with each other about where we can go from here. That will be facilitated by Dan Adams. He's going to ask the panelists a few questions, and then we really want to get some questions from you all. And we're going to use Slido technology to solicit those questions. Catherine will give you a sense of how to do that in just a moment. But know that that's how we're going to take audience questions is through that Slido technology. After the panel discussion, we're going to take a break. And between now and break, we're also going to use that Slido technology to solicit some ideas from you all of the things you really want to talk about as it pertains to air quality. So Catherine's going to give you some instructions again on what kind of ideas we're trying to solicit. But really the idea is we want to inform the afternoon breakout sessions with the topics you care most about. And I just want to note that we're trying to model and introduce you all to a technology you can use in your public engagement and collaborative efforts. So the Slido technology is one useful tool, and we hope again it works well for us today. When we return from that break this afternoon, or I should say when we do the break this afternoon, we're going to vote on those topics and figure out what the key themes are. And when we come back, we're going to break you up into small groups depending on what you want to talk about. So I'm going to leave it to Catherine to kind of walk through some of the mechanics of that. And I guess finally, I'll just say when we wrap up those small group conversations this afternoon, we're going to have a facilitator from each group share just one or two key nuggets that came out of each conversation. So even though you won't be able to participate in all those conversations, you can hopefully hear one or two really key ideas, sort of actions and opportunities that the different groups identified. So I think with that, Catherine, I might pass it over to you to tell us a little bit about Slido and how we're going to use it today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Danya. So hopefully you all have started experimenting with Slido. I know a handful of you have. You can do so on your mobile device. Feel free to start doing it while I'm talking. You don't have to sit here and give me full attention. So take out whatever mobile device you're using and navigate on whatever web browser your mobile device uses to www.sli.do. You don't need a special password or you don't need an account to log into Slido. You just need our event number, which is M564. It's also written on the little flyers on your table, so you'll just type that in, and then it'll say, welcome to the dialogue on collaboration. You'll press enter. If it's not working for you, you can do it on your laptop too. Or borrow a friend's. Another great way to get to know your neighbor. And when you log in, you'll see 3 things at the top of your screen. One is ideas, one is questions, and one is polls. So throughout the day, we encourage you to submit questions under the questions panel for our panelists. Under ideas, I've put a question to you all. What topic related to air quality would you most like to discuss in your small group discussions this afternoon? You're welcome to submit ideas there. You're also welcome to vote for other ideas that people have already submitted that you like. So we encourage you to do that. And last but not least, we are going to have 2 little polls today. One is already live under the polls section, and that's just to gauge your existing attitudes and perspective on how we're doing on air quality in the Salt Lake Valley. We're going to have another follow-up one later this afternoon after we've completed our small group dialogue to see if anything has shifted with you all. We will actually be able to see the results of both of those polls, and in the follow-up materials that I'll send out after the dialogue, we will include the results, because I'm sure this room loves data, so as much as we do. I think that should be the basic overview of Slido. Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay, great. Well, have fun, and I hope to see you on those polls. And again, if you're having trouble accessing that, I can come help you. Just come
Can
by.
I just make a quick comment?
Yes.
On the benefit of people over the age of 55,
Yes.
which I am, these colors don't work.
Oh,
We
okay.
need contrast.
Oh, okay, great.
So please, next time you do slides, make slides that the contrast is easy to read.
Great. Thanks for the feedback.
We can put the,
And we can lower the shades
Yeah,
to
that's fine.
reduce some of the glare. So.
perfect, yeah, we appreciate that feedback. So as I noted a moment ago, we want to give you all some shared language and concepts to take throughout the rest of the day. So the first thing is, what do we mean when we say collaboration? I hear all sorts of definitions for collaboration, and some of them I really don't agree with. So I want to give you a sense of at least what we mean when we say collaboration. Really, we just mean people working together to address a common problem or to seize an opportunity. Or as I often put it, working together to address an issue of mutual concern. And this thing called air quality is a really good example of an issue of mutual concern. I don't think any of us want bad air quality, so it's very few of us, right? It's something we all care about, even though we may have very different ideas about how we think it should be addressed. So collaboration is not, it's not kumbaya, let's all just get along. That is not what collaboration is. It is not just being nice. It's not just meeting or talking. I hear often, oh, we collaborate really well, we talk. That's not the same as collaboration. Talking helps to get to collaboration, but it's not enough. It's not the same as public participation. Public participation can be more or less collaborative, but those things are not synonymous. Collaboration is not you telling them what to do or them telling you what to do. I hear this often between, say, the federal government and local governments. Well, we just tell each other what to do. That's not collaborating. And it's not the same as compromise. We hear a lot in the world right now, we need to compromise better. I'm going to tell you why I don't like that word. You may still use it, but in my mind, it's actually not the word we need to use. We need to collaborate better. So collaboration is a pragmatic skill, right? It's not kumbaya, let's all get along. It's a pragmatic skill. It is a way that we can make conflict productive and at least not destructive. It really involves effective multi-party problem solving, which in turn requires using interest-based negotiation, mutual gains negotiation to address that issue of mutual concern. How do we negotiate solutions that meet all of our interests to address this issue? And it really involves the co-creation of innovative solutions, or at least collaboration at its best can lead to really innovative solutions. So folks may have heard me say this before, but I think of compromise as putting hot water and cold water together, and you get lukewarm water. And usually that's not really so great. That's not what we're going for. Instead, in my mind, collaboration's like taking water and putting it with flour and maybe some bananas and some nuts, and you get something really great, right? You get banana bread or whatever your preferred thing is, right? So it's taking those different elements and putting them together to get something better, not just compromising and getting something right in the middle that maybe doesn't work well for folks. Another way you might think about this, and to put that idea of interest into context, we like to use the story of the orange. Again, I know some of you in this room probably could say this as well as I can because you've heard me say it so many times. But bear with me. So imagine a situation in which you have, say, a mom and two teenagers, and the teenagers are fighting over the last orange in the kitchen. And the mom walks in and says, "This is silly," grabs the orange, cuts it in half, gives both of those teenagers a half. And they both throw their half of the orange on the ground and stomp out. And mom says, "What the heck is going on with that? That's clearly the fair solution, right? There was only one orange, so you only get a half." Well, she goes and talks to her daughter. "Why are you so upset?" "Gosh, Mom, I needed the juice of a full orange so I can make a smoothie, and this half of an orange isn't useful for me, so thanks for nothing." Mom goes and talks to the son. "Why are you so upset?" "Well, Mom, I needed the rind from this orange to bake this cake I wanted to bake," because you know your sons bake lots of cakes. Anyways, bear with me, like I said. "So I wanted to bake this cake, and now I have half of the orange and its rind, and that's not enough. I can't do anything with this, so thanks for nothing." So the mom steps back and thinks about that, right? Well, gosh, there was one orange. I just assumed that they both wanted that orange. I cut it in half and gave them a half, but that didn't actually work well for either of them. If I had actually asked the question of, what is it about this orange that you so want? What are you trying to do with this orange? We would have quickly realized that those things that the both parties wanted weren't mutually exclusive at all, right? And it seems very simple, but this is more often than not that what we find when we work out in the world as facilitators, that more often than not we think what we want is mutually exclusive, whereas if we really get to the why behind it or the interests, we find often it's not mutually exclusive at all, and that we can negotiate solutions that work well for all of us, meet our key interests, and frankly that often create a lot of value, right? We could have had a cake and a smoothie to share, and instead we had nothing. And since it's the holiday season, right, think about it in terms of pie, right? Compromise is taking this pie and cutting it in half or cutting it into some piece. Collaboration is about making that pie bigger so that there's more to go around. So just some things to be thinking about throughout today. So the basic takeaway, right, is collaboration is about working together to address an issue of mutual concern. This requires focusing on interests rather than positions and seeking solutions that meet all key parties' needs and interests, which is very different from compromise. And if done well, it often results in innovative value-creating strategies. Okay, so that brings us to air quality, right? I think this is a situation where we really need those innovative strategies. And I think people are working together on this. You'll hear more about that today. And there's probably a lot more we need to do together. Part of what's so interesting about air quality, like a lot of environmental issues, it's what we call a wicked problem, right? It is extremely complex. It is multi-scalar, meaning it crosses many different jurisdictions, ecological scales even, and it's non-linear. I think we'll hear from Kerry that there's certain things that don't follow direct pathways when you think even just about the science of it all. But even just one intervention we do might have unintended consequences. So as part of that, there's really no singular problem definition. Each problem is sort of a symptom of another problem, in that, say, air quality is a symptom of a lot of other problems. And if we try to address air quality, we might create other problems. Therefore, there's no one right single solution. Frankly, there's only better or worse interventions, and we might think we're doing good things until we realize that had unintended consequences. So we're going to have to keep learning and adapting. And as a result of that, as the academics say, there's no, quote, stopping rule. There is no clear point at which the problem has really been resolved, especially because we're going to continue to have ongoing, say, emissions and issues and emerging challenges. And I think we'll hear from Teri about some of the growth coming our way and what that means for air quality, right? And there's just going to be new emerging challenges. So that means in some ways that we need to be thinking at different scales, across different stakeholder worlds, and that we're going to have to continue to work together. And so I like to use the Langdon Group's 5 Ps as a way of you thinking about, who needs to be working together. We need to be working together across the public, project, program, policy, and political levels, and then kind of vertically across those things, right? The public needs to do some stuff, and maybe our elected officials need to do some stuff. So throughout today, be thinking about those different people who can intervene and how they can work together across, kind of horizontally across those levels and vertically across those levels. So again, basic takeaway, there are lots of, air quality is an issue in which lots of people need to work together across sectors and scales over time and amid change. So that can be kind of overwhelming, right? But one of the key things I want you also to think about today is that in every challenge, there is an opportunity. right? So let's reframe things from the just thinking about the challenge to how do we leverage that as an opportunity to do things better. And as part of this, we like to talk about the yes and mindset, right? It's easy to say, wow, air quality is so complex, there's nothing we can do. So instead of saying that, how about, yes, air quality is a complex, wicked problem, and there are things we can do to address it. So how can we work together to do that, right? Or yes, the region is growing rapidly, and we can and need to grow in a way that improves air quality. What innovative ways can we do that? Right, so I want you to really get into that mindset, maybe take some of this away from today. And this is not just a overly optimistic, rosy perspective. This is more of a how do you take a challenge and leverage it into an opportunity. So with that, the final thing I want to put out there for you all before passing it on to Dianne is that we as collaborative process designers really value the importance of diagnostic work before we intervene in a system. So if we're going to try and help folks work together to solve a problem, we want to understand what's going on. We want to understand why people need to work together, how they need to work together. So just like a heart surgeon isn't going to do surgery before doing all their diagnostic tests, we don't design processes without understanding what's going on. So that's part of why Dianne got to do a lot of interviews before this whole event, which we wanted to model collaborative process. So at that, I'm going to pass it off to Dianne to share some of the things she took away from a variety of interviews with folks prior to the event.
All right. Before I get started, just by raise of hands, how many of you are participating in a dialogue for the first time here with us this afternoon? Awesome. Well, welcome. One of the really interesting things was I'm participating in the EDR's short course on effective natural resource collaboration. So I used it as an opportunity to do the assessment that helped inform this event. And I can't say just over 18, at least 18 interviews took place in the span of a month and a half. And I quickly was immersed in the air quality conversation. Although having been a lifetime resident of Utah and Salt Lake City, there were some really interesting takeaways after my very first conversation. And one really quickly emerging theme is that there is agreement that we have an air quality problem in Salt Lake City and in Utah. That, I don't think that was always the case if you go back just a few years. And so that's a really great indicator of a lot of the work that's been done in raising awareness and groups working together to, address the problem and work together. So that's that issue of mutual concern, is that people agree that there's an air quality problem. People also agree that it is complex. Like Danya mentioned, the complexity of air quality is compounded by our amazing geography, but also the growth that we're experiencing here, particularly in the Salt Lake Valley. And the fact that a lot of the pollutants are not linear. They don't behave the way we want them necessarily to behave. So there's a little bit of, understanding that and how we interact with that. Also, with the complexity, there's just a lot of interconnectedness, which if you look at things from a collaborative perspective, that's just an opportunity. Because there's complexity, there's also opportunity to make new connections and reach out with a lot of different stakeholders that are involved in the issues. The uncertainty, that was something that was really on a lot of folks' minds, that with the growth estimated for the Salt Lake Valley, the growth that we've already experienced in the last few years, and people feel like the air quality problem is getting worse, which actually, in my first conversation, the air quality is better today than it was back in the 50s. And this is where I defer to our amazing experts. But there's just a lot of uncertainty on what that means for us and our quality of life and health and economic growth. So with that uncertainty, it's a major challenge on knowing where to start. And we just don't know, with potential regulatory challenges, some gaps in the information that we have on air quality, a lot of different things. But again, turning that into looking at opportunities. A lot of folks talked about, there's some low-hanging fruit. There's opportunities where we can look at direct emissions. We can look at building upon the relationships that have already been established with groups from advocacy and industry and health, all these different groups coming together to address that uncertainty and look for a path forward. There are some urgent issues. Anyone, those of you that are involved in the statewide implementation plan are aware that there's the urgent issue of getting Salt Lake Valley into attainment. And with the state implementation plan out and public comment being received, that's one step forward, but also there are some other emerging issues, such as seeing increases in ozone and the growing reality of wildfire smoke and how that affects our environment as well as greenhouse gases. So it's like, it's not as if our air quality problem now isn't enough, but that we see some other issues coming and that there would be value in putting some things into place now to address those. I think just the common interest was really a great takeaway, is that where folks were seeing movement and seeing things progress is that they found a way to come together around that issue of mutual concern and address their common interests. So with industry and advocacy groups, two groups that I think historically you think of being adversarial, those groups are the ones that have been coming together and participating in as partners under UCARE and having those conversations and finding areas on where they can agree and move things forward. Also common interest in that raising awareness with the public, and that air quality is not just something for the agencies that they need to worry about and take care of, but that it's something that comes down to every person living in the valley, where we have a pretty vested interest in good quality and good air quality in Utah. Lastly, just the conversation almost always came around to the fact that all these other issues came down to, okay, so what do we do about the future? We need some type of long-term plan. What are we going to do about the future? What can we do now so that we're set on a better path moving forward? And so really thinking about, what does that mean for Utah? What does that mean for people moving to Utah or growing up in Utah? And I think the one thing that's not on this slide is that Utah is uniquely positioned because of our general collaborative spirit. That people were pretty optimistic about how we could move things forward because we have a proven track record of being collaborative and coming together and working towards a common solution. And so with that, it was just kind of like, all right, we can do this. We just keep moving and building upon some of these principles here and some of the principles that Danya talked out to tackle the complexity with coming together and building upon those common interests. So with that, just things for you to think about. I didn't want to get too much into that because, again, the assessment really helped inform our panel and how they could help just bring a lot more light to that. And we don't want it to be, you all have your unique perspective on air quality and how you're engaged with that. But this is an opportunity to kind of look at it from a different, more neutral perspective and see, with all the different interests in this room, where are the new opportunities to come together? And if we see barriers, how can we look at and address those barriers to move things forward? So just want you to be thinking about that, finding those common interests. Also be thinking about, the stakeholders. If you're looking around this room and you're thinking, man, I really wish so-and-so was here, make a note of that, and you can even share that with us. But those are the types of connections where if someone's missing from the conversation that needs to be part of the conversation, then we need to look to reach out and bring them in. So also just be thinking about how this can play into the latter part of the afternoon in our small groups. What do you want to talk about? What is top of mind for you? What are some things that you think that we could make headway on in the next 6 to 12 months? Because this event, we're not necessarily in a position to convene and move things forward, but we have this amazing audience full of people that are already engaged in actively addressing the issue or that have an interest in getting more involved. And so who are those people that can bring together, and how can we build upon those interests? I think that's it. That's all I have to say. So with that, we'd love to turn the time over to our Dan Adams with the Langdon Group. He'll introduce our presenters and we'll go from there.
Hello, everyone. It's exciting to see all you so excited and your smiley faces out here. We're excited for this panel. I think it's going to be great. So let me do some quick introductions, and if you panelists want to come on up too. Actually, you guys are going to stay there, and we're just going to have each speaker will come up and speak, and then after we finish the presentations, then our panelists come up. So ignore what I just said. Okay. So I'm going to first introduce Thom Carter, and Thom will be our first presenter. Thom is the Executive Director of the Utah Clean Air Partnership, or UCARE. Thom has a career of doing very interesting political and policy work, both in New Jersey and here in Utah. Thom also has a really interesting background tied to professional sports, so you have to ask him about that a little bit too. So we're excited to have Thom, and he'll be our first speaker. After Thom speaks, we'll then hear from Kerry Kelly, and Dr. Kelly is the assistant professor in chemical engineering here at the University of Utah. She spends a lot of her time working on energy, air quality, and human health. And she has a very diverse background as well, having served 8 years on Utah's Air Quality Board, and she currently serves on Utah's Air Quality Policy Board. Kerry also has a pretty wild background tied to whitewater, and you'll have to ask her about that, kayaking and rafting. Alan Matheson will then speak to us, and he is the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality. And Alan has been a tremendous friend to all this work we've been doing with collaboration. When Michelle Strobe and I first started this, the very first person we went and talked to was Alan, and he gave us tremendous feedback and has really helped guide and lead where we're at today with this program. So Alan's a great friend and has helped us a lot. And Alan also has a tremendous background too, besides his work as he's the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality. After Alan presents, and we'll then hear from Teri Newell. Teri is the Deputy Director at UDOT. Teri has done all kinds of interesting things in her role at UDOT as a Region Director in Region 3, and now in her role as the Deputy Director. In her role as a deputy director, it's kind of been changing a little bit too, and also that she is now working on issues related to Utah's growing population, advances in technology, and the evolution of the transportation industry. And so we're excited to hear from her and about a lot of those changes and things she's working on. And I don't have anything super cool and interesting about you, Alan, I don't know. But Teri is a runner, but yet she's a self-deprecating runner, but yet doesn't want to talk about that too much. I don't know. She lives in Iowa. That's pretty cool, right? Yeah, okay, all right. So then after Teri speaks, we'll then hear from Vicki Bennett. Vicki is the Sustainability Director for the Salt Lake City Corporation. She's been doing all kinds of interesting work with program management, climate change, mitigation, adaptation, energy policy, food security, all these different things. So we're excited to have Vicki here with us. And I don't know anything super cool about Vicki's spare time either, but I'm sure it is cool. And then lastly, we have Ashley Miller. Ashley will close us out with some thoughts as our last panelist. She's the policy director at Breathe Utah. And Ashley is an attorney, and she's done all kinds of work, both as that policy director and as the vice chair of the State Air Quality Policy Advisory Board. And Ashley's cool things are she has two kids that she's very proud of, and she also was a professional skier, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with you, Thom, if you want to come up, and we'll go from there.
And just a quick reminder to folks to use Slido to submit questions for the panelists. So you can do this throughout the different talks. If somebody is saying occurs to you, you want to ask a question about that, great, or something that arches over them. So a reminder to use Slido to do that. Oh, oops, let's go.
Okay.
You're just gonna have to switch.
You're good.
All right, how's everybody doing? Good, we're having fun. My name is Thom Carter. I'm the executive director of the Utah Clean Air Partnership. It's good to be here with everybody. Let me see if this works. Okay. The Utah Clean Air Partnership was started about 6 years ago as an initiative by Governor Herbert, and housed initially as part of DEQ and then rolled out to be its own standalone nonprofit organization. It has a diverse board. We have 2 members of our board who are actually panelists here. By our bylaws, the executive director of the DEQ is on our board, so we appreciate Alan serving on our board. We also have, by bylaw, a member of the governor's staff on our board. Kerry Kelly's on our board. We have scientists on our board. We have doctors on our board. We have NGO representation on our board. We have industry representation on our board. We have physicians represented on our board. Did I already say that one? And we have small business and business represented on our board. It's a great, diverse board that gives us a strong perspective on what's going on out there and allows us to use an appropriate word today, collaborate. UCARE has 3 guiding principles or 3 pillars of what we talk about. The first one is public education. Everybody, really what we try and do is go out and ensure people understand what's going on in the world, what this air quality situation means, and how people can be part of the solution. So we do a large-scale public education and mass media program every single winter. You'll see it'll start in about a week and a half and run through end of February. And we're talking to people on a mass level, also on a social level. That's our first pillar. Our second pillar is partnership. We try and get people together. Everyone is part of this. So we try and get people together to have these solid conversations, to talk about their concerns, to see how we can collaborate and work strongly together. We have a monthly meeting. That's part of this. Our next meeting will be next Friday, where Derek Miller, who's the CEO and president of the Chamber of Commerce, will come and actually be speaking about the air quality impacts of 3 big projects: the inland port, the airport, and the prison relocation. Those are big topics. He wants to come and speak to our group, our partners, about that. And he feels like this is the right place to come and talk. It's a good group, it's a good organization, it's a good group of friends and really organizations that are coming together to participate. Our final piece is grants. Over the last 5 years of our grant cycle, we've given out 50 grants to a tune of about $1.4 million. And our grants program is quite simple. I'm not a scientist. I know what I know about air quality because I listen to smart people. But based on our very close partnership with the DEQ, when people have good ideas or solid ideas or strong ideas about how to reduce emissions or shift behaviors, they apply to our grants program. We have those programs then scored based on if we think they will work, and then we provide funding. And we can give away as much money as I'm able to raise. And this last grant cycle, which we've just completed, we had $900,000 in requests for our first round through our letter of intent round. We pared that down to about $530,000 of requests, and we funded $250,000 of those projects. That's who UCARE is. I know I need to go faster. One of the things we do, though, as I talked about, is public education. We want people to understand what the problem is, and so the first things first is, what is an inversion? And do we understand that? And so we produced some videos to help people understand that, so let's play that now.
Before you can understand Utah's air quality challenges, you need to understand a little bit about our geography. Many of our valleys are surrounded by mountains. Take the Salt Lake Valley as an example. It has the Ochre Mountain Range to the west and the Wasatch Mountain Range to the east. These mountains meet at the south end of the valley to create a bowl. During the winter, this bowl causes a weather event known as an inversion. Basically, a layer of warmer air acts as a lid, trapping the cooler air below. And just as the cold air can't escape, neither can the pollution. We can't control the inversion. While it happens just a few times each year, the pollution it traps can't leave the valley until after a storm or heavy winds blow through. What we can control are the emissions we release into the air. This becomes increasingly important as the amount of pollution in our air doubles every day during periods of inversion. But the good news is, even simple changes to your daily routine can have a big impact on our air. Things like reducing the temperature on your thermostat, being idle-free in your car, or carpooling and riding transit help every Utahn breathe easier. In other words, if we work together, we can reduce the negative effects of inversion and improve Utah's air quality. So show you care about Utah's air and make changes to reduce your emissions by visiting youcare.org today.
Inversion. It's a complex problem. No easy solution. But there are simple things that we can do to help mitigate it, right? I'll skip this next one. It's about summer ozone. We also have an ozone problem. I'm sure someone else will talk about that. Skip that. So, what I like to say is there are no perfect answers, but there are practical solutions, right? We saw some of that in that last video. When we work together, when we identify ways that we can collaborate, then we are mitigating our effects and working to find common solutions. This last September, we did a large-scale poll. In years past, we've done surveys, which goes in and talks to people. We thought, let's spend some real money and poll the general public and find out, really, do they understand the problem? And are they willing to be part of the solution? We worked closely with Lighthouse Research on this poll. So let me just run through some of our quick findings. When we asked people an open-ended question, who contributes the most to bad air quality? So for years and years, the answer has always been, it's the refineries. The refineries are the problem. Point sources, we got to shut down the point sources, that's the problem. We spent a lot of time, energy, and money. Organizations like ours, the DEQ, great people have been out there telling people, no, it's your vehicles, 50%, around 50% of your emissions, of our emissions in the airshed come from cars. We now see that messaging is working. And because 52% of people in an open-ended question identify that vehicles contribute most to air quality. Second is industrial. Third, they say home heating. Now, that's not accurate to the data, but at least people are now identifying, hey, it's my car. At least half the people are saying that. Additionally, when we ask an open-ended question, who is responsible for solving the problem? 57% of the people say it's me. That's a big deal. That's a shift in the paradigm, significant shift in the paradigm. No longer are we pointing fingers. Now, some people are still pointing fingers. But if we can say 57% of our general public know that if I'm part of the problem, I have to be part of the solution. That's progress. That's real progress. 36% say state government, 16% say the feds. It goes on from there. And these, by the way, like I said, open-ended questions. Just calling up on our surveys. What can we do? What are people willing to do? What would help us? You can see here we've got a handful of things that people would do. It falls in line, like we talk about, with mobile sources. And so here's this other question of, during an inversion, what are people willing to do? What have they done? What are you doing more frequently during an inversion? People say they're carpooling or they're taking transit. Even 77% of people saying they're idling less. Now, these are good numbers. Are there always holes in some polling? Do we actually believe all of the numbers? Is this fake news? I don't know. I do like these numbers, and I like the questions that we've asked. But that doesn't mean we're stopping. There's still a lot of percentage to fix this here. Here's the interesting part. This is really what we run into. We ask people to define themselves. Define you. How does this describe you? 52% of people I take some measures to improve air quality, but only if it's convenient or saves me money. Now, that's a big deal. 25% say, look, I'm all in. My predecessor, Ted Wilson, used to refer to people in three ways. You have your saints, you have your sinners, you have your savables, right? It's a great way to describe it. 25% of the people in our poll, they're saints. They're doing what it takes. They're buying an electric vehicle. They are walking in February to the bus stop. They are doing what it takes, no matter what, no matter the cost or convenience. 52%, that's our savables. They're saying, you know what, if you make it easy for me, or you make it so it doesn't cost me that much, I'll do some things. 3%, I don't care. I don't care. Well, good for you. Toughen up. But the other folks kind of in that savable realm as well, the 7% that says, I don't really think my participation, what I can do will help, and they're wrong. And that's part of our job as a society, as an organization, to tell people your individual effort will help. We'll skip through this video, but really what it boils down to, really what we're trying to talk to people is helping them identify those simple changes they can make that are both cost effective and convenient every day. So on top of these simple behaviors, which are transit and carpool, trip chaining, biking or walking, reducing your cold start, reducing your thermostat, these are all simple things. Aggregated together make a big difference. But even back into our data, when we ask people, why don't you ride transit? 89% of people, when we combine all the data, 89% of people say, I don't ride transit because it's inconvenient. Only 5% say it's because of cost. So when we talk about how are we planning for the future, we have to look at how we're planning our transit. We've got to put people in the position to succeed. And that's what we're here to do. Find success stories. So a couple of examples. We just did, in partnership with Rocky Mountain Power and the DEQ, we did a large-scale snowblower exchange. Snowblowers, that's not a big deal, right? Gas-powered snowblowers. You use your snowblower, and on average, 8 hours a winter. Not a lot of emissions. It actually is. It's the equivalent of driving from Los Angeles to Miami. 2,700 vehicle miles traveled. It's a dirty engine. And think about it, Alan tells this story very well. Think about when you use your snowblower. It's when our air is the cleanest, right after a snowstorm. And then you're out, you're turning it on. So we had enough money we drew down enough money to purchase about 450 electric snowblowers, and that you could buy from us for a reduced rate. Instead of $400, if you want to trade yours in, give us your gas-powered one. We'd sell you one for $70, $69, plus taxes and fees. People were interested. We had a nice press conference with Alan and the Lieutenant Governor. We sent out some just really targeted advertising. How many people do you think signed up? Any idea? We had 450.
Thousands.
12,000. 12,000 people signed up. Convenience and cost. We're working now on a large-scale 5-year lawnmower exchange program. We've done lawnmower exchange programs in the past. The state just did a program, a targeted airshed grant on they drew down $9 million from the federal government to help people shift from wood-burning appliances to gas-powered appliances, from a wood-burning stove to a gas-powered stove or fireplace. We ran out of money in the Salt Lake airshed in a week, about a week. Yeah, almost overnight, basically overnight. We ran out of money in the Utah County Provo airshed in about a month, maybe a little less than a month. And in 3 months, we ran out of money in Cache County. People, when given the opportunity to succeed, will succeed. This is a picture of one of the programs that we funded at the UCARE level. An inventor saw that his school buses were constantly idling, and he thought, this is terrible. This is not good. And so he put together a plan, and he went and he thought, he talked to the bus driver, said, why are you always idling? And she said, it's cold. They have different ways to do these things, and I want to stay warm, and I don't want to shut down my bus in between routes. And so he said, okay, I'm going to invent a device that makes it so that you can turn off your bus and keep it warm. We were able to provide funding. They got matching funding from Grant School District, and they have now 40 buses, idle-free buses in Grant School District. Programs like this are happening all the time. But we have to keep working. We have to keep working together. I appreciate your time. There's a lot of good things going on and a lot of good people working on this, but there's so much to do. As we continue to make progress, though, and you made this fantastic point, there is no stopping point. So as we know that emissions are getting better, as the governor made a phenomenal announcement, I won't steal that from Alan's going to talk about that as well today, it's still a bad air quality day. And so we just need to be constantly aware that our individual choices and behaviors every single day affect air quality. So make a determination today, talk to your neighbors and friends, help them find one thing they can do, and it'll make a world of difference. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, and I think Thom did such a really good job explaining what some of our problems are that I'll skip some of my first slides, and I will start talking about how complicated it is, and I think that was the job they tasked me at. So I'm actually a really bad fisherman. So whenever I fish, I end up with this like knot of like fishing line. And so that's kind of like our air quality challenge, and what we want to do here is figure out where am I gonna start untangling that massive knot of mine. So just to give you some ideas about the complexity of our wintertime particulate matter challenge. So we have emissions. We've got emissions from our cars, our buses, our industrial sources. We have our home heating, we've got our fireplace, we've got our transportation sources. So what happens during our wintertime inversion is all of those emissions get together in this under this cloud of our inversion, and they react. And those reactions are somewhat understood, but not very well understood. And so what happens is that then forms our particulate matter. So just to tell you a little bit about that particulate matter, if you look at a filter that is from one of our monitoring stations during a wintertime inversion, and you measure what's on that filter, you'll see that about 2/3 of what's on that filter is what's called indirect particulate matter. So that's formed by all these reactions here. And about 1/3 is from what's called direct. So that's like soot from your diesel engine that comes right out of your diesel engine and ends up on my filter. But what isn't understood too well are all those reactions that lead to the 2/3. But before I go further, I want to say that we are responsible for both the direct and indirect. Sometimes I hear people say, hey, most of the problem is indirect, there's really nothing we can do about it. And that is just not at all true. So we're responsible for the volatile organic compounds, for the NOx emissions, and the SOx emissions that contribute to this challenge of our wintertime air pollution chemistry. And then to make it a little bit more complicated, when we're trying to look at reduction strategies, when we reduce a pound of direct emissions, that is a reduction of 1 pound in our air quality burden. However, if you reduce particulate, or if you reduce NOx or volatile organic compounds or SOx, you get a less than a 1 pound reduction. And then to further complicate things, not all volatile organic compounds are the same. So it is a challenge. So here is just a reason why we might need a little bit more research. So we've got our sources, and there's even a picture of a cow here, and I'll talk about why that is there. So, and some of those are pretty well understood. So many of our biggest sources require direct monitoring, but there are a lot of other things, like industries may have miles and miles of pipeline, and it's really hard to figure out what the emissions from those are. Also, how many people might be burning solid fuel? So that is somewhat less understood. Then all these emissions react in our atmosphere with the chemistry and the meteorology, and those are all sources of uncertainty. So we've got uncertainty in our emissions, uncertainty in our chemistry, some uncertainty in the meteorology, and how all these things tie together. And the challenge is to untangle that knot enough so that we are making the best choices so we can help turn the dial to improve our air quality here in the valley. And then just a few things, a couple examples of things we need to understand. So the picture of the cow is, where does all the ammonia come from? So if you look at measurements in our valley during the winter, and if you look at estimates of where the pollution comes from, there seems to be a lot of ammonia, and we're not sure where it comes from. So if you look at the inventories, the accounting of where all the emissions come from, it doesn't really add up. And we don't really have a lot of cows or agricultural sources in this valley. So people are trying to figure out where this comes from. Another question, how can we encourage behavior to reduce emissions? And these are just two examples. So if you're burning solid fuel, per amount of energy you get out, you have orders of magnitude more emissions. So how do we get people to make those correct decisions? How do we get people to turn down their thermostats, buy the most efficient heating devices we can? So how do we incentivize this? And then just on a health question, how do we protect our most sensitive individuals? Should asthmatics be starting to use their inhaler before the inversion? These are the kinds of things that people don't really quite understand yet and still need better understanding. And I'm going to close this with just an example of how policy can affect air quality. So this is a research project I've been working on for the last couple years with researchers in electrical engineering and computer science. And we pull data from DAQ as well as a bunch of low-cost air quality sensors, and we try to integrate that into a picture. And if you look at the date on this, this is the 4th of July. And what you can see is that boundary shows where fireworks are allowed and where they're not allowed. And that will give you a pretty good visual appreciation of how policy can affect pollution very dramatically. And so we're talking about several, probably 5 to 7 times more pollution in the base of the valley than what you see on the edges, and that is because of our fireworks policy. So that's just an example of how policy can really affect things. And then finally, I wanted to thank all the people that fund the work we do here at the University of Utah, and I appreciate it. So thanks.
Well, good afternoon. And, Dan said he didn't have a cool thing in my background, so I'm going to share one. Dorm hamburger eating champion. That's right. That's right. 10 in half an hour. And it's something that I continue to work on. Keep going. As Danya said, when you start with collaboration, you look for some common ground. And I think we'd all agree that there's nothing we hold in common more than the air we breathe. We all share that air shed. And we all, can think about the important impacts of air quality on the things that matter most to us. Our health, our sense of well-being, the health and well-being of those that we love the most, our economic security, because it affects our economy, beauty, the feeling of pride we have in the state, on and on. So these are important things. Now, the Department of Environmental Quality is tasked with regulating air quality, implementing the Clean Air Act and the Utah Air Pollution Control Act. But it goes beyond that. We've got several people in this room that work for the Division of Air Quality, and I can tell you that they come to work with passion. They care because they live here, raising families here. This is home. And so this is something that we take very, very seriously. I'm going to talk just a little bit today about the regulatory structure for air quality, where we are relative to that structure, and some of the things that are happening. Now, under the Clean Air Act, it sets out these criteria pollutants, and then they establish, based on science, what a healthy standard for those pollutants are. So for particulate matter, they'll go through about every 10 years or so and review the literature and identify what level is deemed to be healthy, and then build in a margin of safety below that and set the standard. And all parts of the country are tasked with meeting that health-based standard. And because it's reviewed regularly and there's more and more data that comes out, typically that standard becomes increasingly stringent because we're learning more that it has an impact. Those areas that don't meet the standard have to put together a state implementation plan which is a plan to get into compliance and show through modeling they can do that. We in Utah at this point are in non-attainment. We're not in compliance for ozone and particulate matter in parts of the state. So let's start with ozone. Ozone is generally a summertime issue. It's usually when sunlight reacts with chemicals in the atmosphere, it creates ozone. We've also had a recent finding where we get wintertime ozone out in the Uinta Basin. So that's a new and interesting technical and scientific challenge that we're trying to address. In 2015, EPA set a new standard of 70 parts per billion. That's the health-based standard. In 2017, they designated areas of non-attainment. And that includes the Wasatch Front, for the most part, and Uinta and Duchesne counties below 6,250 feet. Those areas are in what's called marginal non-attainment. It's the lowest level. And those in marginal non-attainment don't have to develop a plan yet to come into compliance. If we can meet the standard 3 years from the designation, we're set. Well, we're 1 year in, and I got to tell you, we had a bad summer. With the fires, with the sunlight, with the heat, we had high levels of ozone on a number of days, so that's not a good start. A little better out in the basin for wintertime because there wasn't much snow on the ground, and there's a correlation between snow on the ground and the amount of ozone produced. Okay, let me talk a little bit about particulates. This is what we see during the inversions for the most part. You heard a little bit about how that's formed. So we have non-attainment areas along the Wasatch Front. There are kind of three of them. One in Cache Valley, one in the Salt Lake, Weber, Davis, Tooele, Box Elder counties, and one is the Utah County area. Those were all designated as being in serious non-attainment. Not because the air is getting worse, but because if you fail to meet the deadline for coming into compliance, you're automatically kicked into the more stringent level and new requirements kick in. Let me give you a little bit of good news. The Clean Air Act determines compliance based on a 3-year rolling average. So looks at 3 years of data, averages it. EPA about 3 weeks ago confirmed that we had 3 years of clean data in Cache Valley. So technically we're designated as being in attainment in Cache Valley now. And there's a long, decades-long process to fully get into attainment. You have to have a maintenance plan, et cetera. But that's good news. In Utah County, we've got 3 years of clean data, and we fully expect that in coming weeks, EPA will say you're in attainment in Utah County. And in Salt Lake County, we're in attainment at all but one monitor. So that's great, right? Let's celebrate, go home? No. We all recognize that meteorological conditions have a real impact. And we have another bad year like 2013 with lots of inversions. We're going to be right back in the mix. So no time to celebrate yet. Let me just mention, though, a couple of trends. One, there's this sense out there, a narrative that we hear all the time. Air quality is getting worse. The state doesn't care and isn't doing anything. I'll tell you that's not true. Over the last 15 years, from 2002 to 2017, we increased our population by 34%, 770,000 people in the state. During that same time, we reduced our overall emissions by 38%. That works out to a 53% per capita reduction in emissions over the last 15 years. That's significant, right? So again, ready to celebrate? Well, not quite. I think the messaging here is, number one, those that say we can't do anything and should give up are wrong. We are making progress. The efforts that everybody's making are making a difference. So we can't just say it's time to give up because we can make a difference. The second group of people saying, look, we've achieved a lot, we ought to feel good about it, let's celebrate. That's not the answer either, because we're not there yet. And as long as there are people living in unhealthy air conditions, we're not happy, we're not satisfied. And the governor said that over and over again. One day out of compliance is one day too many. So we're continuing to work. Well, let's talk just a little bit about how we've made progress in reducing our emissions. There are kind of three categories of pollution sources. We've talked about them a little today. You've got the stationary sources, which are the industrial smokestacks. Those facilities have been required to put in place the best available control technology. And right now, we're reviewing each one of them to see if they've got the best and most appropriate technology available. So that's continuing to come down. Look at area sources. These are small businesses, paint shops, restaurants, dry cleaners, our homes and buildings. That's about 39% of the contribution to our air pollution problem. Those are the most difficult to regulate because they're the things we do every day. They affect our convenience the most. They're also the things that grow with population. We've put in place over the last few years 30 regulations to address area source pollutants. We looked at what every region around the country is doing and took the best and most stringent measures they're doing and applied them here. So that's making a difference in what's happening. The third category is vehicles. Now, that's about half of the pollution during the winter. Cars are getting cleaner, and that's a good thing. That's where we've achieved the most progress, cleaner vehicles. We've still got a ways to go because the 15% of the oldest vehicles are producing 50% of our pollution from vehicles. So the turnover of the fleet helps, working on cleaner fuels. And we can't regulate them as a state, but we can twist arms and we can provide incentives, and we're making progress there. Let me just talk briefly about what's ahead. Last year, we, with the governor's office, set a goal that between now and 2026, would reduce emissions in the state by an additional 100,000 tons. And we're working hard to get there. The governor made a big announcement this morning as part of his budget. He identified the 5 areas of primary priority in the budget. And one of those 5 was air quality. And he's proposing a budget of $100 million to go to help improve air quality. I think the most we've ever seen before was about $1.3 million for some monitors, $500,000 for some research. This is significant, historically significant. So we'll see if it gets to the point. We're going to use that money for, see that demand Thom talked about for changing out wood stoves? Can go to that. The demand for changing out those old lawnmowers and snow blowers can go to that. Old diesel engines, construction equipment, those kinds of things. We expect that we'll make additional progress toward that goal of reducing emissions by 100,000 tons in the next 6 or 7 years. I appreciate everybody in this room and the contributions you make. I know you're here because you care, and I look forward to talking about it more, so thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm glad to be here today. I'm sorry that the only interesting thing about me is that I'm from Iowa. That doesn't, I don't know that that cuts it. And the thing about me being a runner, I get about 1 run a weekend, so that's a little bit painful. I cringed when that was said too. But what I will say related to that, although I work for a transportation agency that does not have specific goals in terms of air quality, I'm not immune to the concerns of air quality personally and professionally. I don't want to run on a day like this. My son happens to be a cross-country runner, and I don't like him to have to run on days like this, and I don't like to have to try to convince him not to. So, I have an interest in what our air quality does as well. But let me talk to you a little bit about what we are doing at UDOT and what we do with transportation and how things may be changing. So this, I kind of cringed a little bit too when Thom showed these. I pulled these from some other presentations we have, but this just shows you that we are all talking to each other. Thom had parts of these slides in his presentation, so I'm just going to go really quick on those because he had both of those as well. But that also shows we're working together as a community on all of our issues. So let me just say that we have probably 3 areas that we think about with transportation where we can have air quality get better. One of those is technology. And if you look at the fleet of vehicles we have right now, we have about 2.5 million vehicles registered in Utah. And you can see what that range of vehicle types are. And then you look at by fuel type. And you look at all other fuels, and about 2% of our vehicles are alternative fuel vehicles. And then you look at the cut at the bottom of hybrid EVs and plug-in hybrids. And you see that we've got about 4,000 electric vehicles registered in our state right now. And that may seem like a really low number. This shows what we have experienced in the last 3 years in terms of growth of EVs. And again, 47% of 4,000 is not a lot of increase of vehicles. But let me tell you what we're seeing in the industry in the changes for technology, not being driven because of air quality issues, but being driven because of safety and connected and autonomous vehicles. In order to do a connected and autonomous vehicle, that's going to be an electric vehicle. So as you start to see us change over to how we get people moved around and what types of vehicles they're in, the industry is moving towards electric vehicles. What nobody agrees on right now is how quickly we're getting there. We don't have quite as high adoption rates of electric vehicles in Utah as we do in some other states, but I believe that once we move more to the connected and autonomous, that we're going to see a big leap in that. But again, that's just my guess. There are different numbers all over the place. But that's one thing that we are optimistic about. As we move towards that, which helps us go to more safety, it also helps with the air quality. So now another way that we can help with transportation is we have a TravelWise program in UDOT. And it looks at a number of strategies about how we can get cars off the road. And while our goal may not explicitly be air quality, our goal is to get vehicles off the road. We are now trying to think as a department about moving people, not moving cars. And that means there are many ways that we can do that. And so we've got all of these strategies that we are working towards that helps us move people around, because we are realizing very quickly we're running out of real estate to be able to widen roadways. We have to start looking at all the strategies out there. So that's part of the TravelWise program. And then we have a specific program within TravelWise, the Clear the Air Challenge, and you can see what the start of the partnership was 8 years ago, and everybody that came together to do the Clear the Air Challenge. And that has been a very successful campaign. And this is, I literally clipped this out of an email I got yesterday about the Clear the Air Challenge. It used to be that they did it in the summer because they thought they could get more people switching their modes in the summer, but now realizing it's a better opportunity to try to do it in the winter when people can see a more meaningful effect of it. So I would encourage everyone, this starts on February 1st. I would encourage everyone, if you're not already, if you don't have the app and you're not part of the program, if you haven't done it in years before, you should try to do it this year and see what you can do to help. Now here's just some of the numbers on the results of what has happened because of the Clear the Air program. I'm not going to read through all those. You can just kind of take a look at those. And then one thing that I'll say is important about it is while we have about 50% of the repeat people doing the program the next year, what we do understand is that we are getting about 3/4 of the people are actually long-term changing their behaviors after they've been involved with the program. So they're more likely to sustain what they did as part of the TravelWise program. So now a third thing we can do is deliver our projects differently, or the type of choices that we give people in their transportation. One of the things we're really starting to concentrate on within our department is corridor planning. And you may say, that's a simple thing, we've always been doing that. Well, UDOT has usually been looking at what we need to do for the roadway. Now we're saying we need to look beyond that, and we need to look at the whole corridor. And what you see up here is you still see a vehicle, but you also see transit. You also see active transportation. And when we look at a corridor, we're trying to think about all the uses in the corridor. We've got some corridors that we aren't going to have the ability to get any more lanes. For instance, I-15, we did a study a couple of years ago, the Wasatch Front Central Corridor study, and found that when we get to about 6 lanes each direction, that's about the widest we're going to go with I-15. And so we need to be concentrating on what we need to do for transit in that corridor and making sure that we have active transportation corridors to go along with it. So that's going to be something you'll start hearing from us as a department. And if you aren't hearing it from us, ask the question, how come you're not looking at that as a comprehensive corridor? So that's going to take a little while for us to get that fully throughout our organization in our vocabulary, but that's something that I think is going to help make a difference in air quality, because we're going to be trying to get people to use other modes. We're running out of space to put everybody. And then let me talk about another initiative we have right now, Utah's Transportation Vision. And this is something that, because of Senate Bill 136, this just shows, kind of a graphic on what we were asked to do because of Senate Bill 136. And Carlos Braceras, who's our executive director, is supposed to be putting together a set of statewide strategic initiatives across all modes to help us think about what our goals are for transportation. And the way we are doing this is by working with a number of people. And Alan is part of our group. We met on, was it on Monday? It feels like it's been a couple weeks ago already. And Thom is part of that group as well. We had 20 people, I'll switch to the next slide, representing all of these groups sitting at the table to say, what should our transportation goals be across the state, statewide? And I guess maybe I should rephrase that. Not what our transportation goals are. What are our goals statewide that transportation can help us achieve? And I'll tell you that one of the strong comments and subject matters that came out of that discussion was air quality. So while I say that UDOT doesn't have a specific goal towards air quality, we are a part of a broader community. And as that broader community has goals for air quality, we need to work in that framework as well. So that's something that we met as a group for the first time on Monday. We are going to be continue to work together and come up with a set of either goals or guiding principles. We aren't sure what's going to come out of this process, except that we know that we are going to come together in a truly collaborative way as a community and figure out where we should be taking transportation and how it fits into our statewide goals. So then let me just end quickly with, Dianne wanted this to be my video, because what it actually shows is if I run at fast speed and somebody's sketching this whole thing out. And if you start from the right side, we start out with saying that we are still going to be at UDOT. Actually, it starts in the middle. And the middle is supposed to represent that we have this huge growth coming at us. And when we look 50 years out, we're going to be doubling the population of the state. We've got some stressed areas like Utah County and Washington County that are going to triple in size in the next 50 years. Where are we going to put all those people, and how will they travel around? We know we're not doubling our roadway network. That's a given. That's why we need to be thinking about other ways to think about our transportation system. So we start out with the idea of we're still going to widen roadways. We're still going to build new roadways. But as you kind of work your way around there, we're going to concentrate on a grid system to make sure people have good good connections to get around. And then you see the clocks in the roadway. We want people to choose their travel times so that they can shift off peak. So we don't have to build more lanes. We just have people shift the time they're traveling. And then you start to see in the upper right, we are trying to encourage people to carpool. And then as you swing around across the top, I think that really kind of represents maybe a different way of us approaching things when we all work together. And that's that we as UDOT need to also be supporting transit and helping make sure we've got the right solutions. So you swing over into a community that when we look at that, we say it concentrates on the right land use and connecting people where they live to their jobs and connecting them to transit. And then you see a swarm of people and bikes and active transportation coming towards that transit system. And so if we all work together, that's the future we're trying to go towards, where we have this truly multimodal representation for our transportation system. We're making smart decisions about our money and how we get people around. And when we do that, I think that will have an effect on air quality. So.
Hi, I'm Vicki Bennett, and I'm the Sustainability Director for Salt Lake City. And I keep trying to think of the best little known fact to give you, but I think a number of you are probably recipients of one of my little known facts, and it is that as my husband says, I'm one cat short of being a crazy cat lady. and so I'm always fostering cats and have kittens around, and I said it's because as much as I love working with the public, after a full day of working with the public, I like to just go home and hold a kitten. And so, you can always look me up. I've got a basement full. But I'm going to talk a little bit about some on-the-ground work that Salt Lake City's done as an example of collaborative air efforts. And, really, because there's just so much going on, and we have to say, well, what's next? How can we take all of these ideas that we have and really start to implement it? And as a city, how does a city engage? How does the capital city of Utah engage in all of this? We don't have regulatory authority. That's either at the state or in some ways the county. They do some of the air quality for emissions from vehicles. And, we really have leadership and influence. And it's always, truthfully, it's frustrating for us. We're 200,000 people. We're the biggest city in the state. But we're in a valley of 1 million people. So we can only influence so much directly. And at the same time, we also realize that our population doubles every day because of people who have to get from wherever they're living to our downtown. So as much as we can try and find ways to influence, it is purely working in a collaborative effort with all of our partners here in the room to try and improve our air quality. And that's what our goal has always been. So what we did recently is we started to look and we said, what can we influence? And you've seen all of the data. What are some of the major, what are the major causes? And we looked at the fact that as we are, our partners are working on air quality from vehicles, and DEQ is working very closely with industry on how they can influence air quality. The one thing that we have that is really unique to the state is Salt Lake City has a large set of large buildings, and those are area sources. And if you think about it, the direct burning of natural gas is a direct cause of air pollution, carbon pollution, and that's something that we would like to try and influence. And again, it is influence, and try and make it so people understand how they can improve and be more energy efficient. We've got 1,900 large buildings that are 25,000 square feet or bigger in Salt Lake City, in the downtown area. And we realized that for the city itself, that's about over half of our carbon footprint. but we always try and translate it to air quality because that's something that people really do understand. So what we did was we created what we called Elevate Buildings. And in partnership with some other large cities across the nation, we were modeling how could we influence large buildings to become more energy efficient, because it not only would save them money, but it would also help our immediate air quality and our inversions. So what we did was we really started to look at ways to encourage them to measure and see what their energy use is. And by doing that, they would then understand better where they could improve. And we actually did a large number of focus groups. And we had probably one of the largest engagement processes the city's ever gone through. We started working with developers and building owners and managers, and we asked them, we said, what would influence you? How would we be able to work with you to get you to reduce your energy use in your buildings and to understand your energy use in your buildings? We had focus groups, we had meetings, we had one-on-one group meetings. We went to the legislature and said, what could we do as a city that you would accept and realize that this is going to be a benefit for all of our buildings? After numerous meetings, numerous work, the sorts of things that first came out were the idea of let's make sure everybody's measuring, and one of the other, and what we call benchmarking, and then actually putting out those numbers and making them public. Because then someone coming in to rent a building or lease space in a building could look at it and say, that's energy efficient, or that one isn't. And then we even discussed the idea of would we require some sort of retrofits or them to do any further analysis and do some improvements. So through this whole engagement process, we realized that we definitely did want to have the tracking of energy use. And one of the things as we were going through the process is they said, well, that's a lot of work. We don't know how to do that. Or how are we going to get all the data and put it into, we asked them to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager that's run by the EPA. One of the comments was, well, how are we going to get it all in there? So we went to Rocky Mountain Power and Dominion Energy, our two major energy providers, and they actually, with some fairly simple work on how they did the analysis and then sent the information to the building owners, they were able to make it automated. And now the building owner had the data they needed. So that was the first thing that was, we said, okay, we'll make it easy for you, as Thom said. First thing it has to be is easy. They then would provide their Energy Star score to us, and 50, 0 to 100, 50 being average. And then we are doing it, so there's a phase-in of reporting. If it's 50,000 square feet, we're asking it for this year, and 25,000 square feet, we're asking it would be done for next year. And then we also asked that they would be evaluating themselves to see if a tune-up could be a good idea for them, if they have a score of less than 50. So this is where we really took the input from our stakeholders when they said, we don't want to be required to do a tune-up. I said, well, if you evaluate it, go to the power companies who actually will do these evaluations for you for free, and they come to you and say, well, here's your silver platter. If you do this, you're going to save energy, and give them the benefits. We don't have to require it. They're going to see the benefits right there. So we put all of that together. All of the data is going to be available on our website, and we were able to pass an ordinance. It was something that, I think that we're going to really see some good benefits. Our overall estimated impacts is we think we're going to see 10 to 15% reduction in energy use from most of these buildings. So what really worked? Communicating early and often with the stakeholders, emphasizing the cost savings, because what is the number one thing that people are always looking for? It was really important for people renting and leasing these buildings, so That way, they're able to then see the benefits of this. Engaging the utility partnerships and all of the rest of our leaders has made a big difference. That means the large building owners, developers who we're working with. We listened to their concerns and we made adjustments. We dropped some of the things that we were thinking of because, they said, here's where the largest benefits are. And then we've offered workshops from here on out on how to benchmark and what to do. And we have a continuing recognition program too. So we're trying to give them a lot of kudos for what they're doing. So that was, an example of something where we really did reach out and create one program as a city. The other thing that we're working on, and we've had going on for a number of years, is what we're calling We Can, which is the Wasatch Clean Air Network, which is very informal, but it is a true network of local governments and businesses that are looking at potential policies. And we are working with UCare. They do a lot of the work that is voluntary, and we're looking at how can we try and influence businesses to make changes and even influence the legislature. So we've had numerous meetings where we've been able to reach out to, like I say, to businesses and such. We educate them on building energy efficiency, on electric vehicle, just in such a way where they can implement it on their own. So it is all getting back to partnerships. The partnerships are what's critical. We've all shown slides like this. It's how we're going to get this done. It's listening to each other and making sure that we understand the issue and each take our area of expertise and apply it so we can solve our air quality problem.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Miller with Breathe Utah. Thanks for having me. So I wanted to speak with you guys today about some of the work that many of us here in this room are doing, and specifically I'm talking about many of the several organizations that work on air quality and the state agencies and legislators, lawmakers, and I'm not discrediting all of the work that we all do individually on an individual level at homes for ourselves just because of our pure passion for life, right? We all need clean air to live a happy, healthy lifestyle. So I first just wanted to give a little bit of background. When I first started with Breathe Utah, I actually worked on the large stakeholder process that Vicki was just speaking about, the Elevate Buildings Initiative. And that went on for several years. And actually during that time, I took the short course that Danya had mentioned. And I also took it with a gal named Wendy Lee, who was the city's energy advisor for that particular project. So it was a really exciting thing to be sort of immersed in the work and be working on it. Whoops, something happened. Working on it while going through this certification program, right, to become a super collaborator. So I think that, are we back on? Okay, where's the little thing? All right. So air quality is one of these issues that I think really can only be worked on through a collaborative process, right? I think it's really the only way to get some results. And I think there are some very specific areas that we're working on right now where this is really, truly the case. And one particular issue that I've been working on for a few years now is an area where the state cannot actually regulate, and that is the area of locomotives. And under the Clean Air Act, the state cannot set its own emission standards for locomotives. And we have a couple of interesting things that we've discovered over the years with the significance and the impact to the airshed that locomotives have. So through monitoring on the tracks lines that you may have heard about, they noticed that when the tracks line passes over I-15, you have this huge increase in NOx. And when the tracks line passes over one of the rail yards here, we have about equal, just huge spike in NOx. So that is a problem. So a little bit of history on the issue. I was also asked to be a part of the Volkswagen stakeholder process where we were deciding how the money should be spent that we were going to get from the Volkswagen settlement. And switcher locomotives, which I only have a few minutes, so I can't explain what these are, but they're just fascinating things. They were one of the criteria that the money could be spent on. And in the stakeholder process and outside of that as well, we in discussions with Union Pacific, who owns the bulk of these things, they're about $2 million a piece. And as a requirement under the Volkswagen settlement, they have to be destroyed. If they're replaced, they have to be with the money. They have to be destroyed. So that's not a really good business model for Union Pacific because they could just theoretically take them and move them somewhere else. We also decided that the money could be better spent on a lot more projects that have a lower cost. So Representative Steve Handy last year tried to get an appropriation from the state to sort of start a pilot program with Union Pacific to upgrade a couple of these things and see what would happen, and hopefully Union Pacific would just maybe upgrade a few more. And the good thing was the attention was brought to the issue for sure. The bad thing was the legislators said, why should we spend money, state money that could be spent on something else and give it to a multi-billion-dollar company? Why can't we just make them do this? And here's the reason, right? So under the Clean Air Act, we cannot force Union Pacific to clean these things up. And just to give you an idea of how much cleaner they could be about 89% cleaner than they currently are. Due to weather here, these things idle 24 hours a day in the wintertime. They're diesel. They have to idle. Really bad things. So again, no regulation, no problem, right? Well, big problem. So this is kind of funny, right? But best alternative to negotiated agreement, and this is talked about in the short course a lot. I'm an attorney. We talk about this all the time when we're in negotiations. Well, our BATNA isn't so good, but Union Pacific's is pretty good, right? So they can just load up their BATNA and push it on down the line. That's why a collaborative process for this particular issue is so crucial. Another issue, hot issue, I like to say, is wood smoke. Hot because it's kind of politically charged. We do know, and Kerry mentioned, there's a lot of wood smoke on the monitors when there shouldn't be any because we do have burn restrictions in place. So hopefully we can benefit from a stakeholder process to figure out what can we do? What can we do with the regulations that we already have? Do we need to look at something different? Is it mostly public education? What can we do? Another really great project that Breathe Utah is involved in right now is addressing the issue of ozone in the Uinta Basin. As Alan mentioned, we are out of attainment for ozone in the basin and also along the Wasatch Front. So my colleague Debbie is on a working group that involves some very key stakeholders, and one of the biggest questions right now is who else needs to be at the table. So these are just a few issues. Again, since I am limited on time, we can't get into a lot of them, but I think that these are really central areas where air quality is probably one of the biggest areas of mutual concern. Like a previous speaker had said, we all need air to breathe and we all breathe the same air. So let's keep up the good work, and thank you for all that everyone does here in this room.
Okay, invite our panelists to come up to the table here. Okay, well, yeah, and once again, a Slido, if you want to go on there, we're going to actually start off some of our questions from that. You can go on and you can actually click the little like thumbs up button, and I'm gonna start with those questions that have the most likes first. Alan, something you and I share in common is I'm the 6-time Morgan County pie eating champion. Yeah, we're gonna have a, pies are really my platform though, not hamburgers, so we'll have to negotiate that a little bit. Okay, so the first question I have on here that is from, it asks, how do we expect to maintain or improve air quality in the Salt Lake Valley in the face of continued population growth? Anybody want to be our first take a stab at that?
I'll try to be loud. No? No.
Here.
Well, it's a great question. It's on the minds of all of us, right? You look at the population projections, and that's a headwind that we're all wrestling with. More people, more emissions. It's a challenge. I guess I take some part in what I said earlier as we talked about the reductions that are being made despite population growth. And that's frankly due to technologies. Better technologies and emission controls for all sources. I guess it was a couple of years ago, the legislature even passed a bill requiring that beginning this year, all water heaters sold in Utah would have to be ultra low NOx water heaters. So it just changes the shape of the flame to burn more efficiently and reduces NOx emissions by 70%. So, even on water heaters, there's progress. Vehicles, significant progress. As we look at the Tier 3 cars and the Tier 3 fuel together, they reduce emissions about 80% from 2016 model cars, even the new ones there. So we're continuing to try to get the fuels here. The vehicles started with 2017. So all of those things help us continue to make progress.
There's a couple acronyms, and probably most of you guys know this stuff, but anybody want to take a stab at what a NOx is?
Scientist.
Oxides of nitrogen. So when you combust a fuel, you burn it in air, and those reactions, because they're so hot, actually cause some of the nitrogen in the air to react with oxygen and give you nitrous oxide emissions.
Okay, good. The other one was Tier 1, 2, and 3 cars and fuel. Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
Take that, Alan.
I guess it gets complicated, but EPA sets standards for cars and at times for fuels. The state can't do anything to regulate those areas because, understandably, you don't want to have a different standard for cars in every state. It just wouldn't work for the manufacturers. But over time, they look at the technology and impose additional requirements on emissions, make it more stringent. The latest round is Tier 3, and that means that the vehicles themselves, starting with model year 2017, are significantly cleaner. The fuels, going from Tier 2 to Tier 3, reduce the sulfur content of the fuels from 30 parts per million to 10 parts per million. That reduced sulfur allows the catalytic converters to work better and reduces emissions pretty significantly. So again, the combination of cars and the fuels creates significant benefits. The challenge is the refineries in Utah don't have to make Tier 3 fuel. So, and we can't require them to. The legislature passed an incentive that helps pay for the capital costs of putting the equipment in place to make it. The governor has gone around and met with each of the refineries and said, as a citizen of this state, somebody who cares about the state, we need you to step up. And Chevron and Marathon, which used to be Endeavor, which used to be Tesoro, have agreed that they're going to produce the Tier 3 fuel here. We're working on the others.
But that would do more than anything to improve our air quality.
Excellent, okay. Another one of the questions we have here is, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but we know the vehicles are around 50% of our air quality problem. What are the other big contributors, i.e., where do we get the biggest air quality improvement bang for the buck?
Might just be the Allen show. Wood burning is a big one, and Ashley's talked about this as well. And Kerry's research has been phenomenal on this. There are, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know how much it would cost to switch out every wood burning appliance in our non-attainment areas. It cost about, based on the program that the DEQ just did, it would cost about $486 million to switch from every wood burning appliance in these 7 counties, from wood to gas. There's a lot of wood burning appliances out there. Now, in those 7 counties, only 52 have registered, that's the key word, registered as primary heat sources. There are others, we believe, that are primary heat sources, we just don't know that. So when we go out and when the state goes and monitors and finds people who are, as Ashley talked about, as Kerry's research talks about, who are burning on no burn days, only 52 homes are basically allowed to do that. The rest are breaking law, or breaking a rule, depending on how you want to define it. They can be fined, and those fines get doubled every single time. Kerry's research shows that the majority of the burning takes place on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. It's not an issue of heat. People like the way it looks. They like the way it smells. They like the way it feels. What we believe is that they're wrong. And, and it's, like we talk about, it's significantly more convenient to have a gas-powered one. I was a child in New Hampshire, and it's cold in New Hampshire. It's a lot colder in New Hampshire than it is here. And after church on Sundays, my mother would send me outside to split logs. So we could, not to heat the house, mostly because I was obnoxious and my mother wanted me out of the home. And I think about that often when it comes to the convenience element between wood and gas. It would have been a lot more convenient if I could have said to my mother, let's just flip this switch and turn on the fireplace. When we talk to people, oftentimes they want to hear about the air quality piece of this. They do, and everybody in this room, Ted Wilson is now here so I can reference sinners and saints and savables. Everybody in this room is a saint. You guys want to participate in air quality because you care about air quality, but we have to talk to people about what will move them. Oftentimes it's more convenient for you to flip a switch than to light a fire. And the amount of emissions saved by switching from a wood-burning appliance to a gas-burning appliance is significant.
Okay, good. This question shifts gears a little bit. How will climate change affect our air quality concerns? It seems like warmer temperatures might reduce inversions but worsen summer ozone problems. Is that right? Okay.
I can go.
Go.
I'll start, I'll try. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what climate change would do to the wintertime inversions. If temperatures are warmer and we do not have snow on the ground, that would make our inversion in the lid a little less tight. On the other hand, as we start to look at summer and ozone, as the questioner discussed, we're looking at higher temperatures, likely higher levels of ozone. The other challenge is also forest fires and then dust events from the arid lands to the west. So it's a mixed bag.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna say.
Think about last winter, for example. Last February was pretty warm, right? Not a lot of snow. In the Salt Lake County region, we had only green air in February. So climate change is good for wintertime air quality, but it's bad in general. Like, we don't support it. I'm against it.
Thank you, Thom.
On the record, for all you journalists out there, anti, okay?
So you're acknowledging it exists then?
I am, I do,
All
I
right.
acknowledge it.
Okay, here's another question for you. Why has the state had more success with attaining PM 2.5 standards in Cache and Utah counties compared to other Wasatch Front counties?
Well, let's see. First of all, I don't think that's necessarily the case. Because as I mentioned, we've made progress in all the counties. If you look at the Salt Lake non-attainment area, that's Salt Lake, Davis, Weber, Tooele, Box Elder. And there's only one monitor in that area that has exceeded the Clean Air Act standard over the last 3 years. That's in Rose Park. And think about what's around there. You've got the airport, you've got I-215, you've got the freight switcher yard, you've got I-15, you've got the refineries. You're in an area where there's more wood burning and where there are older vehicles. So that's all surrounding that area. So in some ways, I'm not saying we don't have a problem elsewhere, but it's more localized there, and that creates an issue.
I think Hawthorne too. Hawthorne also has been valuable this time.
So we met it the last 3 years at Hawthorne, but it's just been at Rose Park. But again, long way to go. Nobody's declaring victory, but there's been progress across the board.
Okay, excellent. This question says, combustion is the problem. Electric solutions exist for most processes that save money over time. What efforts are underway to promote electrification?
Well, one of the things that the city's working on is we are just now starting a participation on a grant where we are looking at electrification in buildings. And basically, the first step is figuring out what the different technologies are that are out there. You know, we're aware that there's ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. And in those cases, in new buildings, we are finding, you know, from a few of the developers that are using them, that they can be installed, and it really is cost effective if you're looking at new buildings. Difficulty is when it starts looking at the retrofitting issues, because they, you know, everything that we have, if you look at every home, every building here in the state, practically, you know, we've got natural gas already going to it. And a lot of the savings, if you're looking at new construction, is not having to even put natural gas into the building. And so we're going to be looking at the numbers and seeing what the options are, where are the opportunities, and that'll be the first step, and to see where we could implement electrification, because that will be one of our big needs, is to get us off of natural gas to a renewable electricity-based buildings.
Teri?
And I can chime in here too. Breathe Utah and several other businesses and organizations are involved in a partnership between Department of Energy, Rocky Mountain Power. It's the Live Electric campaign. And so my role in that is I go out into the communities and talk about electric vehicles and all of the incentives that are surrounding electric vehicles and charging that are offered through this program. And so as we saw with Teri's presentation, that our electric vehicle adoption is growing slowly, but it is growing, and I think that we have these partnerships to thank for that as well.
One of the barriers for people in getting an electric car is being able to make their way along certain routes. And while we're trying to work on public-private partnerships, we're working with Allen's group, we're working with Rocky Mountain Power, we're trying to come up with a strategy for a network so that people don't have that range anxiety. And we have, it may seem like a really small number, but we have 200,000 that came out of legislation last year for us to work specifically on that issue. And we're trying to leverage that money in public-private partnerships, but one of the places that we can use it the best is where private industry has no interest in putting an electric network, and we can put a charging station in that's going to help someone. We have decided with 40,000 of that money, we're going to put that towards partnering with Price City to put something in near the is it the Dinosaur Museum? There's a museum to try to, it also gives people someplace they can go while they're charging, but it's a place that's a void in the network, and private industry doesn't have any interest in locating something there. So we're trying to be strategic about that. While we have a small amount of money right now, we're also working with Utah State and creating this map of where we need to put charging stations so we can get rid of that range anxiety.
And to Teri's point, OED, Maverick, Rocky Mountain Power, along with UCare, Breathe, and a number of organizations have already worked with the state. Has this 8-state MOU to try and electrify the West. Annie's here from OED and can probably talk better about this, but we've seen you can get from Salt Lake to St. George, you can get from Logan to St. George, and make sure there's a charging station. Maverick was a good partner on this because they don't view themselves as a gas station, they view themselves as a convenience store. And so they want people to come, like to your point, and charge there and shop. And so we've been able to, they don't have ribbon cuttings with Maverick, they have rope cuttings because they're Adventure's first stop. And so we did a rope cutting in Draper, I don't know. When you work every day is a Wednesday, so last Wednesday, I don't know, it was probably like 3 months ago. But there's infrastructure out there. Additionally, and Ashley, please correct me if I'm wrong, which it's highly likely that I am. With the Volkswagen settlement money, there is money in there for electrification of fleets and municipal fleets, as well as some additional school fleets. So there's money out there and to encourage people, organizations, groups, communities to make the change.
I have a question. The production of electricity, and does it contribute to air quality problems?
Not in this airshed. Off the record. Yeah.
Well, it does.
It does, absolutely does.
Of course. And yeah, when you've got an inversion, it keeps everything that's in from getting out. It also keeps everything that's out from getting in. And we don't, the coal-fired plants down in central Utah are not contributing to our airshed, but yes, they contribute to air quality issues. One thing I will say, you often hear people say, well, if you get electric vehicles, you're just transferring pollution from the tailpipe in the vehicle to where it's produced. But the numbers show that the emissions produced in generating that electricity are significantly lower than the emissions from the vehicles themselves.
And you can get solar panels too.
Yeah.
And can I be geeky here for a minute? So when you're converting the energy and you're combusting it to get energy to your wheels, it's about 25% efficient. Power plants, new power plants, even natural gas, you're looking at over 50% efficient. And if you look at the average grid in Utah, someone could correct me on this, but probably in the 40s. So you still have a big efficiency gain. In addition, it's a lot easier to control emissions from one source than a million sources.
Okay, good. Excellent. Here's another question for you. What are the challenges in integrating Salt Lake City traffic lights to create a more seamless driving experience and reduce the stop and go dynamic? Vicki?
I hate trying to defend our transportation because they work so hard trying to make this happen. And it is one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't issues. I don't know if a lot of people have noticed, but suddenly the traffic lights seem to be on faster cycles, which I think is definitely helping. But they do a complete reanalysis of the traffic signals with every couple of years, but it's something that does need to be constantly done. The issue that I've been told that really makes it difficult is the fact that we have the wide streets, which means you have to have longer lights because you have to allow for people to walk across them. And that makes it much more difficult to have the lights all synchronized, as you might find in cities which have the smaller blocks and can just keep traffic moving more efficiently. I always say that, yeah, we do have an issue with some of the idling at the traffic lights, but we have two ways that we can easily solve that. One is we have people buying electric vehicles, or they're getting the vehicles. There are a number of them now that will shut off when they're sitting at traffic lights, which would avoid any of those issues. We also really want to be building our streets so they are more transit, bike, and pedestrian friendly. And I think a lot of it is people do expect everything to be done for the car. And as a city that is more dense and is getting denser and denser, what we really would like to do is make it so it isn't for the car, that we're doing it for the other alternative forms of transportation. So it is something that is considered all the time, but I think we can't really use that as an excuse to stay in our cars. We need to look at all of our other options.
So is it true that you've got a class to teach people to walk faster too?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like we've got a few places where there are, retirement homes, and we've had to, they've come and said, no, you've got to give us 35 seconds to get across the street. And we're like, 35 seconds? And we have to do it. I mean, and you want to encourage and allow for people to actually be able to walk places.
This is a total side tangent, but also, because this is stuff I just geek out over, I totally love it. Lights are based on people going the speed limit too. And so if you think there's a problem with that, you need to check how fast you're driving. Because oftentimes people are concerned about it because they're speeding. So go the speed limit. Solve problems. Obey the law. I don't know. Figure it out.
All right. Are you sticking with that position?
I'm on the record.
On the record, okay.
I'm saying obey the law.
Okay, so a question for all of our
That's down.
panelists is that, and you don't have to all answer, but we've just on the PowerPoint slides today, we have seen so many different organizations that people can be a part of to help work and solve these problems. What is your advice about where everybody sitting in this room, should help guide and direct people that want to participate and be part of solutions around air quality? Any thoughts on that, where we should send them?
Well, I'd be more than happy to say that Thom's UCare is probably your central source. He doesn't have to say this, I can say it for him. And it is really the one largest collaboration. And while we do have a lot of groups that spin off and have different areas of emphasis, appropriately so, I think the nice thing about UCare is that it's where we all do come together and at least can say, we're going to go do this, small group, and they go do it. And some other small group might be working on something else. But that way, our goal always is, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's ensure that each one of us is understanding what other groups are doing, be it our nonprofit partners that are so invaluable to us, or working, a number of us get on the phone once a week during the legislative session and say, what do we support? Where do we need to push? What can we make happen? And, that way we are ensuring that each of us is putting our efforts in the best directions possible.
I can add, too, that we do hear a lot, our state isn't doing anything or legislators don't care. And one thing that you all should do is first find out who represents you, your representative and your senator, state, and, the bigger picture, right? And if you don't like what they're doing, call them out. Hold them accountable. If you like what they're doing, thank them. They work very hard. Whether they're working on something you love or hate, they work extremely hard. And that's really important. I actually did a presentation at Utah Valley University last week, and not one single student in that classroom knew who represented them, except for the professor. That needs to change. It's very easy to find out. You can find out on our website or the le.utah.gov website.
All right, Teri, and then Dr.
I maybe am not going to tell you what group to join, but I think there's a lot of, I think grassroots is a great way to make change happen, and it's a way to make meaningful change happen. And if you're doing something yourself and you're influencing your friends and neighbors, and I will just give you one quick example. 5 years ago, we got an electric car, and I was driving it to work, and I had a whole bunch of people making fun of me for doing it. And within the next year, there were 3 more of them, and we didn't have any more spots to plug in at our office. So people wouldn't have done it if they hadn't, well, they told me, they were doing it just to suck up. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think there was a fear of participating in it, and once they found out that somebody else was doing it and they could ask questions and, well, what's it like? Well, aren't you worried about it? And I'm like, well, here, let's go drive. Let's go see what it's like. So changing minds one person at a time, don't ever underestimate the impact of that.
Excellent point. Dr. Kelly, and then,
And I wanted to add what Ashley said. About this time of year, you get a lot of enthusiasm about air quality, and that enthusiasm lasts till about the end of January when our inversion season ends. So if you are concerned about air quality and you contact your legislators, keep it up till the end of the session.
Alan?
I just wanted to acknowledge that Suzanne Harrison is here, who was newly elected to the state legislature. A real champion of clean air. And so congratulations on the win, and thanks for your interest in this.
Excellent. Okay, here's another question for you. This one says, I commute and am on a strict timeline. It would take me 3 hours to get to work if I use public transit use. What transportation solutions can help us in this situation?
So this is great. This is right into with our data, right? It's inconvenient. It adds time to my commute. I can't do it. So we're not calling out people, but so I don't want to know who you are, so I'll try and answer your question indirectly. The TravelWise app is a really great resource. When we ask people, why don't you carpool? 77%? Well, sure, we'll say 77%. 77% of people say, I don't carpool because I don't have someone to carpool with. Now think about your office. Think about your classrooms. Think about how many people you work with and then maybe work near. You probably have someone to carpool with. It's just hard to maybe identify them. This TravelWise app will help you identify people you're near. Additionally, a paper was just published out of the University of Toronto and with co-authors from the Utah State University and Brigham Young University that talks about how potentially ride sharing, transit, Uber and Lyft can be either positive or negative effects, having positive and negative effects with transit. We had them present our last partners meeting. So I'll get to that 1 second. So if you don't want to add time to your commute, find someone to carpool with. And you can find someone to carpool with. I believe you can. If you feel like maybe when you're at work and you need your car, or you might have different things that you have to do, or if someone drove you in or not, use Lyft and Uber. It's an affordable solution, and that's what this paper says. That it can offset that first and last mile or running an errand in the middle of the workday possibility. 40% of all transit rides in Boston, 40% of all Uber rides in Boston begin and end within a quarter of a mile of a transit stop, of a metro stop. And 25% of all Uber rides in Portland begin and end within a transit stop as well. So what they're seeing is people saying, I don't use transit because of inconvenience. I may need my car. I don't carpool because I may need a car. Well, these new ride-sharing services, and it's not just Uber and Lyft in this city, right? You can use a green bike. You can use a scooter. There's a number of ways that you can do this. You can use an e-bike. Look at me, I'm very outdoorsy, very, very outdoorsy. These e-bikes, I mean, forget about it. What a great idea. And even the e-scooters, I mean, I will definitely get a concussion doing that. But if we get out of the mindset that I have to have my car at work, then if you can forget about that, if you can learn that there are other options, you'll reduce your emissions.
Just a comment about how public pressure can also help. One of the things that Salt Lake City residents have really spoken up on is they say, well, we want to have transit that'll get us better transit back and forth from downtown to the U. You know, we've got so many more apartments going in. How do we make it easy for the people just in the city? And so one of the things that the city is working with UTA on is starting next summer, we'll have a couple of extra routes, more frequent routes, late night routes, and the city's subsidizing it because we feel like it's that important for our residents to have.
Very good. Let me ask one last question. Go ahead. Okay. Get your.
So this is your last chance to suggest ideas for the breakout conversations later. So take the next minute. If you have a burning topic you really want to talk more about and you haven't suggested, use Slido to do that. Because in a moment we're going to vote on what people want to talk about. And I actually want to ask a question since I'm up here. I want to hear about the inland port. What do you all think about the inland port? Haven't heard any conversation about that.
Well, what can we say? The main thing we want to ensure is that anything that's put out there will not affect air quality. And we have passed zoning that we hope will influence that. And our concern is that the Inland Port Board has final say rather than the city. So it's something we will be watching.
Maybe just briefly on that, the legislation that was passed this summer in special session said that the Inland Port Board has to develop a business plan that includes a sustainability plan developed in conjunction with the Department of Environmental Quality. So we got thrown in as consultants, a bit of a surprise. But there's some interesting language in there. It says it has to meet or exceed all state and federal standards. It says that they have to use the best available emission control technologies, that have to minimize energy and resource use. And there's some goals that are set out in there. One of those says in the legislation to improve air quality. So we'll see how that goes. But there are conversations underway. A lot of groups are looking at what's happened at ports around the world. I think the port itself is going to be relatively small. I fully expect that it'll be electric and pretty clean. But a big question is what happens all around it. You got about 25,000 acres or something. About 700 will be the port. The rest is what develops around it. So there's a lot to look at there. But we've got folks in our shop that are talking to other agencies, talking to consultants and others, and trying to lay the groundwork for doing it right. We'll see where it goes. We've got a commitment to it.
Any other comments there? No? All right. Well, I think most of our panelists are going to be able to stay and be part of our breakout groups. So we'll be able to ask them some of your questions that we didn't get to. But if you can join me in thanking them all for coming and taking part. We'll now have a 15-minute break, and so if you could all be back in here ready to roll.
But before you go.
I'm not there yet.
Okay, but I'm.
Okay, so if you could be back, but go ahead.
No, it's fine. I just want to make sure before anybody leaves that you know you've got the next 15 minutes to vote for your top 3 topics that you'd like to talk about via using the poll on Slido. So we put a new poll, pick the top 3 topics you would want to talk about. When you come back, we're going to organize you into small groups so you can talk about the things you're most interested in.
So be back ready to go at 3:30.